We are
Good
missing
idea.
5 persons to get 1,000 subscribers. So if any one of you not subscribed yet, just subscribe.
Exactly. As the young people say, was it smash the subscribe button or something like that? You can't just click it anymore. You have to like smash it for some reason. It's very destructive. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling now. Thank you very much for joining, everyone. Another Power BI Berlin user group. Today we have Jay from Microsoft, who's going to talk to us all about something pretty fantastic that we've all been looking forward to. Excuse me. It is visual calculations. I'm very interested. I've seen a little bit about them already, so I won't talk too much because I know basically nothing, and Jane has all the knowledge. Jay, I'll hand over to you. If you want to start doing your thing, that would be much appreciated. We're excited to learn from you.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks for making the time, and thanks for joining in the evening for you. It's early, well, earlier, kind of 10 a.m. for me. So I really appreciate you making the time out of your busy schedules. And yeah, today we want to talk about something we call visual calculations. We've been working on for the last 2.5 years. Before we get started, please feel free to raise your hand or use the chat to ask any questions. I'll try to monitor the chat as I go. I'll also have a specific point in the deck where I'll just pause for a second to answer any questions. I can go through all the slides, obviously, but I'd much rather answer your questions as they come up, so we have a conversation about it. And then, if you raise your hand, you can unmute yourself as well once I call you out, and then you can just ask your question right that way. Okay, cool. So I'm Jeroen de Heert, or Jay. I go by Jay for everybody who doesn't speak any Dutch. I blame my parents for giving me a very Dutch name. They probably didn't know that I would live in the US and work with people that didn't speak Dutch. They didn't have that foresight, apparently. That's okay. Jay is a good alternative. I work on the Power BI product team, and I'm what we call a product manager over there, which basically means I am one of the few people who try to make functional specifications, functional descriptions of what our features should be doing. So I think about the how and the what of our feature, and the why and the what of our feature, not the how. So I do a lot of market research, a lot of customer conversations, talking to communities, looking at our ideas website, and figuring out what we need to build. And I write that down, and then I work with engineers who actually implement the how. So we get from a functional description of what we need to build into how we're going to build this. And then there's architects in there as well. And those are the actual real rock stars. The product managers are just the one that you see outside, but we don't do all the work. We actually rely on people who know their stuff. So when Ben said, I think it was just before the recording, he said, or just in the recording, he said, I don't know anything and Jay knows everything. That's not entirely true. I know a little bit, and then the real people who actually know everything are the people that I rely on who actually built this. So anyway, that's kind of like a little bit of how this works. And then once things has been tested and are close to release, then I'll become visible again and start talking about it. And I just get to, the opportunity to share the beautiful work that everybody has been doing with our community. And this is one of those moments that we get to talk about that. So if you ever want to reach out to me, find me on social media, on LinkedIn or on X still, on Blue Sky, whatever, I'm there. And also my email address is here, so feel free to reach out at any time. So today, I wanna talk about DAX, the programming language that everybody loves to hate, which happens to be the programming language that I own. And let's see. Whoopsie, that's very fast. Let's not do that. A virtual raise of hands. Who here has ever written a DAX statement from scratch and made it do what you wanted in the first try? Okay, a couple. So there's a couple people that made it work the first try. Some were like, yeah, maybe. Probably my guess is that the people that raised their hand just wrote a very simple sum. Or maybe, sales amount times 2. Yeah, basic arithmetic. Nothing very, very interesting, right? And it's interesting to think about this, right? That honestly, our programming language that is so core to our product, Power BI, is so hard, or is at least perceived as so hard, right? It's very interesting that when I ask our users, that almost none of them, were able to actually do something successfully on the first try. It's a testament to the quality of the rest of the product that our core programming language is so hard, and that we're still the leader in self-service analytics and analytics tooling, right? The fact that the rest of the product is so good and that DAX is perceived as so hard, it's just, a great testament to the rest of the quality of the product. So let's just face it, right? The reality is, this is how everybody writes DAX today, right? You find something somewhere in some source, maybe a community, maybe some forum, a blog, social media, one of these books, maybe, these, right? You read them, you went to the training or whatever. You copy paste basically from here, then you press your fingers or you cross your fingers, and you maybe start invoke some higher power if you're so inclined, and you just hope it works. That is basically how people write DAX. Now, I have a little escape hatch to this. My process is slightly different. When I get stuck and after I do something with like this, and then it still doesn't work, I have the benefit of working at Microsoft, so I can just reach out to Jeffrey Wang, the inventor of DAX, pinging on Teams, and ask him for the solution. And then and I kid you not, he opens screen sharing, opens Notepad, and just starts typing, and within seconds, there's a beautiful, crafted, perfect DAX statement that just solves my problem without him needing any help. But of course, that is not something we can do. I mean, we talked to Jeffrey and we said, hey, can we maybe lift your brain into Azure and provide it as Jeffrey as a service? He didn't really like that idea. Of course, I'm joking. But so, we really have to find another way of making DAX easier, because really the fact that people struggle like this is problematic. I'm not at liberty to share his email, though. That's up to him to decide. So if you think about, for example, something as simple as a running total or a running sum, if you ever try to do that in Power BI, in DAX, you'll soon discover you needed 21 steps. 21 steps to do something as basic as a running sum that everybody can do on the back of an envelope with a little pen and paper, right? You can do this easily. Everybody understands it. In Excel, is literally drag and drop. You need 21 steps in Power BI. That is 20 steps too many, right? We're not talking rocket science here. We're talking something as simple as a running sum. So this is where we really got started thinking, like, how do you want to write DAX? Maybe the answer to you is, well, I don't want to write any DAX. Why do I have to write DAX? Or, well, I like writing DAX, but I want it to be easy, or at least easy to understand and easier to maintain. So there's many different things that we came up with that we wanted to do here. So just to wrap up the problem here, DAX is hard. And if you start understanding a little bit more, to be exact, filter context is what makes DAX hard. So what does that mean? So whenever you write a DAX measure, it is executed inside of the model. So the model is the thing you see in the model view where you have the tables and the relationships, right? And then you write your DAX measure onto a table. The moment that thing gets executed, it's executed in the context of whatever the filters, the settings are on the tables. Now, if you have one table, which obviously is not a good data model, that's relatively easy to understand. But even there, it's kind of tricky already because there's multiple columns. But it becomes way complicated, way bigger problem the moment you have multiple tables with multiple columns and all the filters can be set. You don't know how the user is going to use your measure inside of the visual. If they put it on a visual with a category, that's a different context than a visual that says country or a visual that says year. You have to be almost defensive in writing your DAX measure to make sure that whatever context the user executes that measure into, it returns the right result. So very quickly, you'll find yourself solving some kind of 6-dimensional mental puzzle about how that context actually impacts that number. And it's really hard to explain why the number 42 on the screen is 42. And then on top of that, typical simple business type calculations that everybody thinks are simple, especially people that with the name manager in their function name, are surprisingly hard to do. And of course, we have something called quick measures, which allows you to generate DAX, but the DAX it generates is so hard to comprehend, it is almost impossible to edit and tweak. So really, you're left out to like copy pasting and crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. So that is the problem we're trying to solve. So the answer here is not slap on some GPT. That is not the answer, because that is a game of chance. And we're not in the business of a game of chance. We're in the business of doing math. And math and game of chance really doesn't really work together. So that is not the answer that we're going to come up with here. But it could be added on top of what I'm going to talk about. So what if you could define a calculation without having to worry about what makes DAX hard? So what if we allowed you to define a calculation on the visual instead of in the model? So if you think about Power BI as a pipeline, right? Data sits in the source, it gets transformed, and then it's built into a data model, and then you add your measure. That is where all the complexity of filter context lives. That's where you work with the unaggregated data set and you define your measure. Then after things progress, you eventually end up with a visual at the end. The visual only needs aggregated data and is created after the filter context has been applied. It works basically on a filtered set of the data. What if we allowed you to, just before we paint the visual onto the screen, we allowed you to write a calculation there instead of here at the beginning? That way, at the beginning is still here, but for many cases, you might just benefit from the ease of use when you just write it just before the visual is put onto the screen. So then, that is one thing. And what if then the DAX you would have to write would be easier to understand and maintain? And then on top of that, maybe the cherry on top is, what if we allowed you to do that without actual typing? Maybe just point and click, much like an Excel behavior. Wouldn't that be great? Well, that is what visual calcs are. Visual calculations, or visual calcs for short. They are DAX calculations defined on a visual. We're not inventing a new language here. Let me be very clear. It is still DAX. The stuff you know about DAX today, the functions you recognize there, the sum and averages and whatever you learned will still apply. The visual calculations, however, are different from a measure that they can refer to what is on the visual. Think of this as giving you blinders on purpose. You work with just the stuff that's on the visual. You walk up to the visual and go like, oh, this is the data on the visual. That's where I define my calculation on. So you can refer to anything that's on the visual, including other visual calcs. You cannot reach back into the model. The reason why is because if we allowed you to reach back into the model, the complexity of filter context that we just left out the door comes back and haunts you. So we don't want that. So you're executing in scope of the visual only. And then on top of that, because we're now in the scope of a visual, you can now do stuff that is interesting tricks that measures can do, which allow you to refer to the visual structure, because we're suddenly aware if we're on a bar chart or a line chart or a map or a scatter plot, we suddenly are aware of that and we can start doing things with that knowledge that measures don't have. Now, you might sit here and go like, well, wait, what are you guys doing? Well, we're adding a third tool to your toolbox, right? We have calculated columns. Some people out there believe you shouldn't be using them. I'm not opening that can of worms right now. They are defined on the table. They work on a row-by-row basis, and they are computed at data set refresh. So they're stored inside of your data model. Then you have measures. Those are defined in the data model. They work on sets of rows, and they are computed at query execution time. So not pre-calculated, so they don't bloat your model. They're executed and computed in the context when they need to be executed. Now, think of visual calculations as if calculated columns and measures had a baby, and all the best things of those two worlds came together. So visual calculations are defined on a visual. So they look a lot like calculated columns in that regard, that they're only in one little box. They execute on visible context, which I'll explain in a second once I show you the demo here. And then they are computed at query execution. So that's what they take from a measure. And then on top of that, they can refer to visual structures. So that's something that they have unique to them, which calculated columns and measures cannot do. So they're slightly different. They're a different tool in the toolbox, but we believe they are a great addition and add for more flexibility and quality of code. So visual calculations are WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. That will become clear in the next slide and in the demo. Point and click will be provided if you want. What I'm going to show you in the demo will not have point and click. Why? It's because it's simply not built yet. And then we'll just work with what's on the visual. And we'll also add some extra tricks that allow you to define common business type calculations very easily. Okay, so before I jump into the demo, the most important part of this feature, wow, what's happening with my PowerPoint these days? I don't know what's going on. Anyway, sorry. The mental model here that I want you to have when working with this feature is very simple, but it's important to understand, is any visual that you create in Power BI can always be represented as a matrix. Any visual, a line chart, a bar chart, a map, a scatter plot, I don't care. It can always be represented as a matrix. So basically, that's the core premise here. We say, we show you a screen where you see the visual, and then you see the matrix at the bottom, and we call that the visual matrix. These two things are connected, and if you've already seen Explore mode, maybe that's now in public preview, you can actually see that same behavior. You have the matrix and the visual, they are tied together. This is exactly the same. You see the visual, and you see the matrix. So the matrix shows the data that we need to paint the visual onto your screen. So in this example over here, if I have, for example, a bar chart with 3 categories and 2 numbers per category. This is sales amount and total product cost for 3 years. What I need to paint this visual onto the screen is actually just three columns and 3 rows. I need a year column, I need a sales amount column, I need a product cost column, and I need 1 entry, 1 line for each year. There might be millions of records that came up with the total sales amount and the total number of orders and the total product cost. But that's not what we need to paint the visual onto the screen. That is the unaggregated data that lives in the model. We are now just looking at the aggregated data that is right there that I need to create that visual from. And that is what visual calcs are. They allow you then to add columns onto that visual matrix, extending this data set that sits under this visual, right? So I'm looking at the visual, and on that visual matrix here at the bottom, I can add columns. I can do so using the formula bar, and I can do that using very simple DAX. So these visual calculations, again, can refer to what's on the visual and nothing else. So let's just look at a demo so I can show you exactly what this looks like. If I can get my mouse pointer back. There we go. So a demo. So let's see. Okay, here we go. So this is Power BI Desktop. I'm not pulling your leg or whatever. This is real, actual Power BI Desktop. There's no mimicking. There's no mockery. There's nothing here. There's no Figma. This is real. This is in the product. This might break at any point because, live demos. But I just wanted to call you out that this is not fake. This is not some stuff that is not coming. We're actually actively building this into the product these days. So let me just create a simple visual. I'm going to take the same example as I had before. Sales amount and total product cost. And let me take a year. Okay, so now we have this bar chart thingy that basically shows me, I think the slide actually was a column chart. Doesn't matter. I can make it a column chart. It's okay. Yeah, maybe I'll stick with bar chart today. So, I see sales amount to total product cost for each year. Nothing new here. Now, if you have been paying close attention, you might notice there's a new button over here. That is new calculation right next to new measure. And that thing is only active when you have a visual selected, because that's the entry point for a visual calculation. Remember, visual calculations are defined on the visual. So I can go in here. And now I'm in the screen that I just showed you in PowerPoint. I see the visual, and I see the formula bar, and I see the visual matrix, exactly the components that I just talked about, right? Again, these are tied together. So I see sales amount of total product cost over here, and I see it's 46 million something. That should be the same as here, right? Total product cost and fiscal year, right? So you can see these numbers add up. You can also see there's already a placeholder column for my calculation over here. You can see that calculation is also already being added as a placeholder to the legend. Of course, it doesn't show in the visual because there's no data there. And then there's the inviting cursor for me to start typing, right? So let's just create our first visual calculation. Let me just write something that I know should have been a measure, but just to make a very simple example, I can say profit equals sales amount minus total product cost. Now, before I hit enter, a couple things happening here. No aggregates. I don't need to sum the sales amount. I want to get the profit per year, so I don't need to sum, right? I can just execute this on a row by row basis like I calculate a column. Also, I don't refer to a table over here because I don't care. At this point, this data could have come from multiple tables. In fact, it came from 2 tables. In the model, we have a different relationship. All the filter context has already been applied. I don't have to worry about all of that. I don't care about the tables anymore. It's just one table, effectively. Also, I'm working with aggregated data, right? This profit calculation will not reach back into the model, will not have to calculate and sum up sales amount for 20 whatever millions and millions of rows. It will just subtract 4 numbers in this case, because it will also subtract the total. Can we all agree that that will probably happen very fast, because Power BI will be able to subtract 4 numbers relatively quickly? I think so. So the answer is, let's go. And here's profit. So now we have a profit calculation. Very, very simple. Yes, this should have been a measure, of course, but just as a simple example. Let's do something more intelligent. Maybe I wanted to compare each profit for each year versus the previous year. Okay, so I can do profit, versus previous. Okay, so if I would write this today in DAX, I would probably start, looking at one of those books or look online and try to figure out, like, how do I actually figure out what is the previous year? Because you will have an innate understanding that for me to subtract the difference from profit and previous profit, I need the profit, obviously, for this year, but then also the one for the previous year. How do I figure that one out? It's not easy. Well, maybe visual calculations can help me, because I need the profit. Okay, I got that. And then I need the previous profit. I wonder what the function name would be for that. Any guesses for what the function name for getting the previous profit would be? Maybe previous? Would that be that simple? Sorry?
Yeah, previous.
Yeah, maybe. Let's see. There we go. Previous. So now I could just do this. And now we have a previous profit comparison. I literally just wrote something that's susceptibly simple and almost like English, saying profit minus previous profit. This is how easy DAX can be. Do the mental math, look at the results, and you'll see this is correct.
That's pretty
okay.
Cool. That's cool.
Let's do something more intelligent. What about a running sum? We have a little FX button over here that helps me using templates to create these things. And I can also type them, but just, as a starting point, you can discover them more easily. So running sum. Any guesses to what the name for the running sum function would be? Maybe
cumulative.
Running sum? Maybe? Let's just see. This is literally just called running sum. Isn't this great? This is very easy. Who wrote this stuff? Oh, wait, I did. We did. Okay, so running sum of profit, done. Now I have a running sum of profit. Very, very simple. Oh, you wanted the moving average? Well, guess what the function name for moving average is? Duh, you should know my brain by now. It's called moving average. You type in the function thingy, and then you select the window size. So that is how many years you want to calculate the average over. So I'll pick 2. Now I have a moving average. I can keep going and keep going. You wanted to compare the profit versus the first year? Well, guess what the function name is? It's called first. You want it against the last year? Guess what the function name is? It's called last. You want it against the next year? Guess what the function name is? It's called next. This is literally almost as if you just wrote a couple English statements. Now I see some questions coming in, and I'll pause in just a second to answer those questions. Thank you for putting those in the chat. So before I wrap up this demo, this is very easy, right? We can all agree this is very easy. But if you pay close attention, you see I basically screwed up my visual, because everything I added to the visual matrix is also shown in the visual on top. And that visual looks horrible right now. Maybe I didn't want that. Maybe my goal here was actually to show you the profit versus the previous, the running sum and the moving average, and everything else should not be on the visual. So here's where we have one little trick up our sleeves. We can now hide stuff from the visual, but still keep it on the visual matrix. So if you direct your attention over here to the right, you see a familiar icon, the eye icon. Now I can hide the fields that I'm not interested in anymore. I can move some stuff around. And now we have a visual that only shows the previous profit comparison and then the running sum and moving average in the tooltip. Everything else is hidden. It is still here on the visual matrix. You can see it's still on the visual matrix, and that's on purpose. Why? It's because, well, now I can easily check my work and make sure that what I wrote is correct. And also, remember, Visual Calcs can only refer to what's on the visual. That's what I said. Actually, it's not correct. Visual Calcs can only refer to what's on the visual matrix. So the moment I would delete sales amount, this whole house of calculations would stop working, because profit doesn't know what to do because sales amount is gone. Previous profit doesn't know what to do because sales amount is gone. Running sum doesn't know what to do. Moving average doesn't know what to do. So you have to think about these hiding concepts instead of deleting it. So, but I can rename a field here to say, hey, this is Arthur's sales amount. And now my whole thing will keep working because, you know, profit now has magically updated to refer to Arthur's sales amount because we just fixed up the name, right? So that is what you can do, and now I can move back out, and now I have a beautiful new visual. It's not great, but I'm not a visual designer. But this visual doesn't exist, and contains a couple of very hard calculations that are hard to do today in DAX that I was able to create using very simple statements, right? Profit versus previous, and a running sum and a moving average. Okay, so let's go back to my my slide deck right here. So I'll start answering some questions, but in the meantime, while I'm answering questions, it would be awesome if you took some time and went onto your social media, so your favorite social media, and posted something about this session using the hashtag mindblown and the hashtag Power BI. That will really make my day. If you're not so inclined, that's of course fine. But whatever social media you happen to use, if you want to do that, that would be awesome. Thank you very much for that. Okay. Cool. With that, let me go to some of the questions right here. So I see somebody guessing the function name from a little while back. I'm going to skip over that. So why don't you need to use calculate with the previous function? Paula, great question. In fact, calculate is still here. We're just not showing it to you. We're hiding calculate from you. We're hiding the complexity of calculate from you. Under the covers, the previous function is just a shortcut to a specific call to a function that is a window function surrounded by calculate. But you don't have to type all of that. You just call previous. So that's what we're doing here. Then Andrea asks, is previous based on the sort order of the visual? And in fact, it is. I can show you that. If I go back into my little demo over here, if I can actually get over there. So in here, let me go back into the Visual Calcs editing mode. You will now see, if I change the sort order on this visual, you will now see the previous changing, right? So it's dependent on the sort order. Now, whether or not that is the right behavior for you, that is the question. Right now, this is our default behavior. This is what we do. If you wanted something else, let me know. And also, once we get to public preview time, try this out and see if you like this behavior or not. There is a way to have previous not respond to the sort order. And that is, again, by thinking and realizing that previous is a shortcut to the window functions that we already released earlier. I'll show you how that works in just a second. So moving average for 60 months when displaying, moving average for 6 months when displaying 60 months. Is there a parameter, Michael? I'm not entirely sure I understand the question. You can have a moving average for 6 months. If you're displaying 60 months, you can just say moving average window size 6, and that's it. That will be a moving average for 6 months, assuming months is on the axis. Paul, I'm going to skip over your question right there because the totals are not wrong. They actually are completely what they should be because of how DAX works. And I'm not gonna debate that here. How can we create calculations filtered by specific dimensions that are not shown on the chart? So Selmir, I'm not sure what you mean. Are you saying maybe add a filter to the visual over here in the filter card? You can absolutely just do that, right? You can say I'm filtering by whatever product. Let me just do product color, for example. I can just filter by that, right? I can say product color over here. It's not on the visual, and I only want to see the black ones, right? Of course, the visual, since the filter context has changed, the visual will change. Hence, the visual calculations that are inside of the visual will change because the numbers inside the visual have changed. Very simple. Will it be possible to return string type value and use it on a plot axis or table row column use case? I'm not entirely sure if what you said there, oh, sorry, I'm gonna butcher your name. I'm not even know how to pronounce the person whose first name starts with M and the last name starts with J. Sorry, I'm not gonna butcher your name. So the top n plus other is not entirely where Visual Calcs will help you. In fact, we thought about this, and but Visual Calcs built the plumbing that you need to make this happen, and that's actually a feature that we're planning to add on top to do a top n plus order breakdown very, very quickly and very easily. Okay, so those are the questions for now. Let me just go into the rest of the slides. So basically, what are visual calculations? Well, a couple of new concepts: DAX calculations in scope of a visual, and in support thereof, new concepts and new functions. To hammer home the point, it is just DAX. Most DAX works. So your switch true statement, like here on the slide, or basic arithmetic will work. There's a couple of things that won't work. Those are things that are related to the model. So anything that, for example, uses related or use relationship or related table, those are things that use the concept of a model and a relationship and multiple tables being there as part of their function. That is not available. Those will not work. Why? Because in this case, you cannot refer back to the model. You're only here in this little table thingy. So those things will not work. And then, of course, we have new Visual Calcs functions. So is this easier? Well, you bet it's easier. For example, implement a running sum calculation that sums sales amount over year. The current DAX is right here. It involves calculate, sum, filter, all selected, is on or after, and a max. Not very simple. Once you understand this, it's doable, but not very simple. Visual calculations is just literally saying running sum. Done. One level harder. Given a list of states and number of restaurants per state, for each state, calculate the difference in number of restaurants in that state versus the one above. Current DAX is over here, which honestly I didn't write. This is Jeffrey as a service over here. I got stuck, and he gave me this solution in like 10 seconds with top N1, which I was like, yes, of course that will work, but I never would have come up with that. Some calculated tables in there. Then on the right, we see two ways of doing this using Visual Calcs. One is window functions using offset, and then the actual Visual Calcs expression using previous. Now, this is a good segue into where some of the questions already went into as well. How does this work? So these visual calculation functions are shortcuts, easier to use ways to window functions. So if you have been paying attention, almost a year ago now, we released window functions in DAX. You might have seen them in December appearing on the blog and thinking, what are they doing? Right? We released offset to do relative movement, index to do absolute movement. We released window to do a slice, rank, and row number. And then in support of that, we had order by, partition by, and match by. Basically, what was happening in December is I showed you the Lego pieces that I was playing with to build what I show you today. Because visual calculations are nothing more than simpler shortcuts to these functions. So when you write previous, in fact, what we do under the covers, we write calculate offset -1 with the correct settings for order by and partition by and match by, depending on what visual you're on. If you write first, what we do under the covers, we write calculate index 1 and then with the right settings of order by, partition by, and match by, right? So these higher level functions are just shortcuts to these low level functions, right? So that also means that I think it was Paula asking for whether or not, previous will respond to the sort order. Well, previous will respond to the sort order as I demonstrated, right? But if you didn't want that, you can always express the call to previous in a window function, and then using the right partition by and order by settings, define your own sort order, right? So you can then override this default behavior and say, no, I don't want the previous to respond to the sort order. Instead, I want the previous to be stuck to whatever sort order I have when I defined it. So I will just rewrite the previous into offsets. And then you have the most flexibility and the most power. You can change whatever you want about the sort order and make it happen the way you want it to be exact. But our default behavior will be responding to the sort order. So keep that in mind when you work with Visual Calcs, is that these medium and high level functions, as we like to call them, are shortcuts to low level functions. And those low level functions are the window functions that we released a year ago. Okay, so offset, index, window, rank, and row number. So that's that. And then medium level functions are then the functions that I already showed you a couple of: previous, next, first, last. So that is basically like the things that I've been using. Range as a way to define a slice. I haven't shown you expand and expand all and collapse all yet. Those will come in very handy for you to calculate an average of children, for example, right? If you wanted to calculate an average of children, that's not easy. You can now just do an expand. And for the context of your calculation, say expand to the month level, if that's my children that I wanted to calculate the sales amount average for. And for that, calculate the average, right? So you do an expand, average sales amount on month, for example. Collapse is the reverse. So if you need a percentage of parent or percentage of grandparent, you use collapse. So that basically removes detail from your hierarchy, right? So those are the two directions that you have there to use. So expand or expand all, which goes to the leaf level, collapse all goes to the highest level, or collapse more gradually removing details. And then lookup is basically VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP or XLOOKUP, whatever you want to use it. Basically literally saying, hey, when year equals 2022 and color equals red, find me that sales amount, right? So for that cross of those two axes here, find me that sales amount, return me that number. And isAtLevel allows you to start working with towards a different behavioral totals. So Paul, this will probably make you happy. isAtLevel is the building block that we're now building to allow you to more easily define total calculations. So isAtLevel allows you to say, hey, if year is at level, do this. If we're on the year level, so that's the grand total, for example, do this. If I'm on the month level, do this. If I'm on the day level, do this other thing, right? So you can write an if statement that allows you to define those totals. Now, this is not custom totals, which allows you to then override exactly the total behavior. I want to take a couple steps further. I want some UI and not some code. But again, I'm showing you the building blocks of stuff that we're playing with that we can add more features on top of in the future. Then the last two functions that I already mentioned to you, what we call high-level functions, running sum and moving average. So remember, these two things, high-level functions and medium-level functions, you can only use inside of Visual Calcs. They're only available there. The window functions are available in calculated columns and in measures and in Visual Calcs, right? So that's something to remember. And why is that? Because the medium and high-level functions actually rely on the visual matrix. They have a hidden parameter that I haven't shown you yet, which is called the axes. So the visual matrix is something that you should be familiar with by now. It's literally the thing that I showed you. And then axes is a concept that defines how a calculation traverses the visual matrix on which is being executed. So by default, and calculation will traverse in a certain direction, and that direction makes total sense most of the times. That's why I haven't shown you it, but you will be able to influence that direction. I'll show you that in a second. Then while it's transversing over the matrix, you can decide when you want the calculation to restart. So if something happens, restart the calculation from 0. Then direction combines axis and reset, and then hidden is something that I've already shown you. Okay, so concept axes. Think of axes as how a calculation traverses the visual matrix on which is being executed. By default, it is across rows. The name we picked for that is rows. Basically means rows are horizontal, so across rows is going downwards, top to bottom. That is our default. That is what I showed you so far without you even being aware of it, because I didn't have to type it because it was a default. You can also decide to go across columns, so that will be left to right. Right? Sorry, left to right. I need to do the right way in mirror image. And then you also have the combination of those two, which is columns, rows, and rows, columns. So this would allow you to go the typewriter movement across your matrix, go horizontal first. Remember the last result of the last cell in the first row, then go to the first cell in the second row and keep going. Like a typewriter or a snake. And then the reverse 90 degrees turn would be rows, columns, which you go down the rows first, go up to the columns and go like this across your visual matrix, right? So that would be things that are very advanced. We don't really expect you to use the last two very often, but they're there because we can. It's just, completeness sake. There is 1 or 2 scenarios in which this might be useful, the last two, but definitely expect rows and columns to be the only two you actually use in daily life. So to show you some examples, here's a matrix, and a matrix has 2 directions. It can go this way, and you can go that way. So it allows me to explain all of these concepts. So the bar chart only has 1 direction. It's only downwards, but a matrix has both. So now I can say, the first sales amount on rows, which basically means for each column, so for each year, in this case, look for the first row on the rows and get that sales amount. So all of these red boxes refer to the same red box. All the green boxes refer to the same green box. I see people on the camera going like, does this make sense? Yes, it does make sense. There's no mistakes here, as far as I know. This is what this will do. So basically says for each time calculation is executed, look at the rows, and then for the first row, get that number. So the number is repeated over and over and over again because we're getting the first row. Make sense? Cool. Okay. So now we can do, of course, the opposite one, which is 90-degree turn. So now it says for each column, retrieve the sales amount from the first column. Right? So now we go not across the categories, we go across the years. So now each red box refers to the first sales amount for the first year. Same for the green box, same for the blue box, same for the yellow box. So now it is each calculation for each year refers to the sales amount for that first year. Okay, ready for the stuff that will make your brain melt, because this is relatively easy still. Okay, let's venture into rows columns. So this will do a previous of sales amount on rows columns. So that means for each cell, retrieve the previous sales amount from the row above it, or from the last cell in the previous column. Okay, so what happens here is this cell has no row above it. It also has no previous column. So this cell is empty. This cell has a row above it, and it will happily retrieve the sales amount from there. This cell has a row above it, will happily retrieve the sales amount. This row has a row above it, will happily retrieve the sales amount. This thing doesn't have a row above it, but does have a column to the left of it. So what it will do is, instead of returning empty, it will just retrieve the value from the last cell in the previous column. Again, you wouldn't use this often, but it's something that's there, and this is something you could be doing. Now, of course, I can also turn this 90 degrees again and say, hey, sales amount on columns row, which basically means for each cell, retrieve the previous sales amount from the column left to it, or from the last cell of the previous row, right? Again, we're doing this the other way around now. So now this calculation looks at the previous column. So it goes 2019, 2018, retrieves that number. This one is empty because there's no column to the left of it, and there's also no row above it. Great. This one refers to the previous year. Makes sense. This blue one has no column to the left of it, but has a row above it. So it will retrieve the sales amount from the last year of the previous row. And then the yellow one will again retrieve the sales amount from the previous year. If this broke your brain, that is okay. Just know that these things, these last two things are out there. We don't expect you to use them all the time. It's just for completeness sake that we provided that. Okay, so then last concept that I need to talk about is reset. Reset is not something I can show you. It's coming soon. We haven't built this fully yet. We're actively building the code right now, or at least we were before Thanksgiving. So I need to check in where we are now. But basically what this allows you to do is say, when, if any, would I want to restart the calculation? So for example, if my calculation, by default it's set to none, by the way, but if my calculation is, for example, we're running sum for sales in years, right? So I have quarters and I have years. If I write running sum sales, what will happen is that because reset is set to none, when we arrive at Q4 for a year, and then we move to Q1 for the next year, the running sum will just happily add the number it had for Q4 to the number it had for Q1 and return that number, which is in fact the wrong result, because you probably wanted to sum up the running sum within the year. Then for each year, we start from 0, because that is probably what your business user is after. That is what reset allows you to do. So reset says, hey, whenever I change the year, I want you to restart. So you just write running sum sales, reset year. Basically saying whenever the value for year changes, restart from 0. This is almost as English, right? You can now just write running sum reset year, and it will just do a running sum per year within whatever the quarter or the month, whatever you have there, right? And it'll sum up all the quarters of the months. So that is basically what you need to know about that. And then you will have a combination of this, which is access and reset. So then you get all these combinations of these 4 things. So rows, columns with reset, rows with reset, columns, rows, columns, rows with reset, and rows, columns with reset, right? And then the last concept we already talked about is hidden. And that's something that I already showed you. Very easy, very simple to understand. If something is not on the visual, something is not on the visual, but it has been set on the visual matrix. That's because Visual Calc can only refer to what's on the visual matrix, and then you can show only the end result on the visual matrix. So it allows you to do partial results and build the things slowly in multiple steps. So for example, I'm only showing the profit diff percentage here, but the profit and profit diff are calculations that I wrote before that I'm not showing. I'm just hiding them from view to only show the end result. Okay. Couple questions that I see in the chat. Will visual calculations work in Power BI report server or only in the Power BI service? That is a great question. They should eventually also work in the Power BI report server, but when is something that we have to figure out. They will absolutely work in the Power BI service. So Ben asks, Ben, what was your question?
Yeah, I might have to phrase that with words. When you had those slides where you were kind of all the boxes and showing if you add this, then that'll appear there. I'm not sure I have any purpose for it, but I wonder what would happen if you added those two things together. Like you showed us what happens if you do like exactly here. So you do this one. If you had first sales, comma, rows, square off the brackets, plus first, and then the column one, would would that work okay? Would it?
Yeah, why not? No, it will work.
Okay.
If that calculation makes any sense in your requirement, that's up to you. But yeah, technically, that would absolutely work.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yep. So how do the data sets align with the category names? What happens if you use row, column, V, column, row for comparative purposes? Mark, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Okay.
Can you explain, maybe?
Sure. You know, when when you're doing a year over year, like you showed earlier,
Mhm.
well, when you're dropping, like for instance, on the data set you have up right now, and you've got 36,814 goes down to column, but I want to compare 18 to 19, and the way this columns go down back and forth, or right and left, similar as to how you showed either axis or whichever way. What's the value of having that functionality? Because for, you know, financial statements or financial models, I don't see where this is going to benefit me to have this wonderful looping up and down or back and forth. Can you maybe help me understand the value of why I would use that? Does that help at all?
You're specifically referring to these two, right?
Yes, this right here,
and this
what you
one.
have right here.
Yeah. No, I'm with you, Mark.
Thank you.
I have found limited use for this, for these two. I think are we in agreement that doing this and doing this is very useful?
Okay.
Do you agree with me there?
Yeah, well, I find limited use to that because, I mean, I'm bringing the same accessories sales down for the entire calculation column, but I'm not getting anything for my bikes, my clothing, and the rest of my categories.
That's just because I use the first as an example, right? So if I change an example to previous.
Oh, okay. Would we be able to drag down? Would we be able to drag down or drag across, similar as to what you get? Okay, let me go back to the very beginning. You said DAX is hard, and it really is.
It is.
Excel very hard or very easy. I copy, paste, cut down, pull across, whatever. Will we have that same capability here? Because if we do, then that answers my question.
So the answer is you will have a very similar behavior like that. Yes, not exactly the same, but very similar. So you will be able to just point and click towards having this behavior.
Sweet. That works.
I'm unable to show you that today because we're still building that, but that is absolutely in the cards. Yes.
Well, I do appreciate that. That's wonderful.
Okay, so I think the reason you're picking up on this is because the example is slightly weird, right? The example here is first. So then for each, so for each category, it returns the first, right? But if I wrote this as previous, then for this, it would have been empty. For this, it would have been this number because the previous category is accessories. For this, it would have been this number. And for that one, it would be this number, right?
Okay, right.
Right, and the same for if I did here, the previous sales amount on columns, instead of always referring back to the red number here, each year would refer to the previous year, right? So this number would not refer all the way back to over here. It would actually refer back to what's here.
Sweet. That's exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So that's just an artifact of me picking first as the example for the simple cases.
Okay.
But that's good feedback, actually, and maybe I should just change the example. I wanted to do something else because I've been using previous so much, so I was like, show off some other function. But anyway,
thanks for the explanation.
No worries, all good. So is there a plan to also make it possible to bring visual calculations to rows? No, not yet. However, you can absolutely do execute totals and subtotals with visual calculations. In fact, that's also what Paul picked up on, I think. The reason why the totals look as if they might not be correct is because DAX operates in such a way that we actually reevaluate the DAX measure on the total level. So if you go, for example, on this slide, whoops, which one? This one is a good example. Over here, the total is empty, right? You would maybe expect the total to be whatever the total is above this, which is not something that DAX does by default, right? So here it makes total sense because what happens, the previous sales amount on rows columns here is empty because the previous total row and total column is non-existent. There's no previous row, there's no previous total row. Doesn't exist. For this guy, it does exist because there's a previous total column, which is this number. For this, It does exist because it's the total column over here, right? So DAX is executed on each level. So Michael, we don't allow you to add rows per se. We build columns, but the DAX measures are executed on the subtotal and total level separately. So now with isAtLevel in your toolbox, you can say if isAtLevel not isAtLevel category, then I'm basically on this total. So now I can say if not isAtLevel category, do something. For example, take the sum of this and return that number instead of your default behavior. That is what we get to close to custom totals. I want custom totals to be more easy than that. But again, I'm showing you the building blocks of stuff that we'll build later. So right now, there is no plan to do this. Actually, we're showing you the building blocks, and this is a feature that we might invest in the future, which we like to call custom totals. You can also do, and I'm riffing like pseudocode DAX here. You could do if not isAtLevel category. So I'm basically here. Then take for each category the sales, right? So look up sales for category, and that would then return you the total of this. Slap a sum on that, and then you would be able to return that sum in here as a visual total. But again, that's not very easy. Should be easier. Should be more flexible without doing all of that trickery, and that's what we're built after we're done with this, because we're now building the building blocks that you need to make that future reality. Cool. So let's see what else. Oh yes, we were talking about calculate just a second. So I need to go into that as well. And so where's calculate? And somebody already asked where calculate was. I think it was Paula actually, if I'm not mistaken. But it might be wrong. So where is calculate? So think of DAX as a donut. So DAX is a donut in the sense that if you walk on the side of the donut, it's fine. On the rim of the donut, it's great. Yes, the surface might be a bit sticky depending on the donut that you picked, but it's okay. You're happy. And then at some point, you enter this middle point, this center of gravity where the black hole of all the DAX complexity lives. That's where calculate lives. That is where everybody is afraid of. Now, DAX in reality today is a very thin donut because you walk up to it and you go, if you're just onboarding, you're writing some sum or an average, you go like, oh, I get this. And then very quickly, you have to worry about context transition and calculate again, because the moment you wanted to do something a little bit more advanced, you have to deal with that. So what Visual Calculations is not doing, it's not turning the donut into a pie, right? That's not what we're doing. We're basically fattening the donut. So we're increasing the amount of time that you can walk on this sticky surface before you get into the center of gravity where all the complexity is. So calculate is still here. We're not taking this away from you. It is still here, but we're just conveniently hiding it from you. So if you write first sales amount on year, actually what it is, it's a calculate on sales for first of year, which in itself expands into calculate sales index 1 of year. Because why does this work this way? Well, first was a shortcut to index. We talked about that already, index being a window function. So the calculate sales first year, which is, by the way, something you could write if you wanted to write calculate, it will be expanded under the covers into calculate sales index 1 year, right? So this is how those two things work together. Calculate is still there, but you don't have to worry about it. You can just type sales, year, first sales, year, and that's it. You don't have to worry about calculate if you don't want to worry about calculate. So that's the last slide that I have prepared. So any more questions? And before I open it up for more questions, I need to give a shout out to Dax Memes on Twitter for this awesome meme that they made about about the feature that we were working on for the last 3 years. I think this is awesome. If you ever saw the movie, you probably understand the analogy here.
Very good.
Cool. So let's see. Some more questions.
I had a question. Yeah, sure.
Mhm.
When I was thinking, will these visual calculations, for example, if I'm connecting to a Power BI data set from Excel, will these
Yeah.
calculations be visible there?
No,
So just
they don't exist because
So
they're
they
on
would-
the visual.
Okay.
They're not on the model.
And the examples that you used was primarily showing, for example, a bar chart. We go into the bar chart and then we look at the visual calculations there. I assume we can also use them within a matrix, right?
Of course.
What would happen if I showed it on a matrix and I changed the view to show on rows? Because I'm essentially changing the setup of the matrix. If I have my measures, some of which of those are the visual calculations, and if I go from the matrix to show on rows, will that change how it's the result somehow?
It is. So the example I have here is already on rows, right? Because the rows is the default, right? So if we go in here, you'll see that this actually is just doing rows, right? I don't have to write that, right? If I wanted to do previous, this is a better example, right? Previous is essentially the same as saying previous on rows, right? You also have a little icon here to remember what the behavior is, but this is the default, right? So this value shouldn't change.
Okay.
Now I can, if I have something on columns, let's say I added, I don't know, product category, right? So now I have multiple columns. Now the profit is still on rows because that's our default behavior and also what I wrote. So now for each category, I'm calculating the profit for each year. Make sense? And comparing it against the previous year. If I didn't want that, if I wanted to say, I'm not interested in this. Actually, I wanted to calculate the profit across the categories, not across the years, but across the categories here. What I can do, I can change the behavior and say, I wanted to do this on columns. So now suddenly columns is available to me. So now I can say columns, and now my profit is being calculated across the columns. And of course, since difference of profit and running sum are all based on the same profit calculation that I built, the profit, anything that's based on this versus previous profit calculation, of course, will change because it's based on that number, right? So now the profit versus previous is against the one that is to the left of it, right? So this will always now compare against each category, right? So this is so in the matrix, yes, it will change, but you will have multiple options right there.
Nice.
So if I change the visual, will the visual calculation on the visual be lost? Zhao asks that. Well, no, it will not be lost. However, if your change in visual drops an axis that you used, right? So in this example, I used columns. If I now change this back to a bar chart, my visual calculations will break. We will not drop them, but we will not be able to execute them. Why? Because a bar chart doesn't have a notion of columns, right? So the visual matrix will always be there, but the visual matrix has just dropped the notion of columns. As you can see, there's only one axis left and everything was moved to the one axis. So now my profit diff calculation, I need to go in and say, you know what, change this back to rows or just remove it in all. And now this will all keep working again. Okay. Yep. So there's way more to uncover here. There's way more we're still building. I mean, I wrote a functional specification of 110 pages for this. This is page 40. So the stuff that I promised you about, like not having to type, I did a whole lot of typing. Right? All that stuff is still coming. So, the fact that you can just point to something or eventually, for example, be able to go select this cell somehow and understand how does this number actually came to be? What did you take as input into calculating this number over here? Think of like Excel. When you highlight a cell that has a formula, it does like the little borders with a little shading and then like color-coded border around it. That's something that we're looking into to say, hey, I want to understand how does this running sum came to be? Oh, it's this number plus this number. Okay, now I understand why this number is here, right? So that's something that we're lifting from Excel and bringing into here. So, and then also the ability to just interact with this matrix and say, I want to take this minus something else, right? I want to take this minus this, right? And just click on the items and therefore type your expression.
Is there any possibility to see the model-wide text code behind it? Like to see all the window functions and virtual tables that are created behind for any reason?
Well, in fact, it's not. You can't see it here because it's not in. You know, as you can see, the performance analyzer is by default disabled. But once you execute, like if you go out here and I show where is it? Perf analyzer over here. And start recording, and then I refresh this visual. Now you will see. Well, let me just do that in the DAX query view because that's new. So now I actually see the visual calc, and I see the intermediate result, right? And here you'll see I have user DAX, which is my visual calcs. So you see the visual calcs over here, right? But you don't see the underlying, you see the underlying DAX that we execute to build this whole thing together with like the select columns and all the other stuff. But I think, Arthur, you were after, well, wait, you wrote previous here, right? Yeah. You wanted to see the window function that sits under this, right? Yeah. Now, we don't show you that by default. However, we're thinking about, because that's one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I got so far, is, yeah, this is all great and very flexible, but they're not in the model. How do I store these visual calcs in my model? Can I somehow promote these visual calcs into model measures?
No, but I think if we allow you the use case might be to have the possibility to add one fixed measure from outside of the visual to it. I think it might be quite a common use case.
Yes. So that's something that we're thinking about of doing, but that would mean that we would allow you to say, hey, I've got this running sum. Now store this as a measure into my model. Running sum being a visual calc function, we cannot use that in a measure. So then we would convert it into a window function for you and store that as the measure, right? And then you would be able to say, oh, I understand how this running sum is being built using
would
the window function.
Like a big like this auto measures.
Yeah, it's going to be a horrific, ugly measure because that's all the complexity we're hiding from you. But you will be able to understand. Okay, running sum was turned into this like 15-line DAX statement with window function with a window function in there. You know, that's basically how this works. So you will not be able to reuse them across visuals. They are dependent on the visual. You can copy paste them to another visual. That is what you can do. So you could be able to say, hey, this running sum is interesting. I want to bring that over to another visual. You can do that. We would bring over all the ingredients that running sum needs, but then add those fields hidden to your visual matrix so running sum can continue to work, but we don't show that in the visual by default. That is our story so far. And we're still building this. We're still thinking through all of this, like reuse scenarios. Let me be very honest. I mean, we don't know the answer yet. We have some ideas, but we need you all to tell us what we need, what you guys need, what you all need, right? We've been working on this for like 2.5, 3 years now to get to this stage. Awesome. This will come early next year, 2024, in March. You will be able to play with this before there's any questions about that. You'll be able to play with this in public preview. We're not done at that time even, right? What we'll see is what you will see in March is what I showed you today almost. Right? So all the point and click stuff is still coming. So March is nowhere close to GA, right? Let's be very clear. It's not, we're in public preview at that point. And what I want from you all, when you start playing with this in public preview, the choices that we made along the way, I want you to validate or tell us, no, they're wrong. For example, the fact that previous and other functions respond to sort order, is that the right behavior? We think so, but you need to tell us if it's not. Same with, for example, reusability. Okay, copy paste, great. Is that enough? Or do you want something else? Okay, what is the else story then? What else would you want, right? What do you expect us to do? Oh, we hide the window function from you. Do you want an ability to show the window function? Do you need that? I mean, it's there. We just hide it from you to make it less complex and less daunting to you. But maybe you want to see the advanced code or whatever, right? Tell us. Once you start playing with this, tell us what you need, and then we can build it. Coming March, you'll be able to play with this and give us that feedback. And we need you to give us that feedback because we made loads of choices along the way while we're building this for the last 3 years. So there's loads of things we said like, we're going to go this way. It might be the wrong way. Who knows? We did our research. We did our thinking. We talked to customers, of course. But, you know, it's always limited, right? It's not like we talk to the whole world. So if the rest of the world disagrees, we can pivot, but we need to know.
Yeah, so it's very complex already. So it will be a lot of fun to play with it when we have some real life examples with hierarchies and not just like one dimension. One dimension is easy, but when I, like in a financial statement, I need to subtract like the costs at the third level from the revenues of the second level.
Yeah, that is going to be more interesting stuff, right? Because I can do that. You know, I can do something like year. Whoops. What did I do? Matrix, and I want a value of sales amount, right? What did I do here? Oops, that's not what I wanted. I want a quarter. Yeah, better. Okay, so now I have both levels, right? So now I can do something called average of children to say, hey, for each field, expand, calculate the average of sales amount expanding on the rows. So that would mean now each total is not the total, it's actually the average of the children, right? So here, I'm now taking for each year, it is an average of each quarter in that year, right? So here's an example of how you would work with expand to make an average of children work, right? And of course, once you start playing with this for real, yes, that's where the interesting things for us come back. Like, well, this is great in a lab, but it doesn't really work in practice. That's what I want to know from you all, right? So we'll have multiple ways to give feedback. Basically, in here in the options settings, as you might know already, once you have a preview feature enabled in desktop, right, it has a learn more link. And it also has a feedback link, right? So in here, you can have a learn more and share feedback. That is the link that I want you to give that feedback on, which will be our community website. Also, if you find me on social media, you can always just ping me and tell me it's wrong or great, you know. But that's where we want you to direct your feedback to, so we can actually analyze and think about this. Okay, so let's see what else. What about the performance of those complex behind-the-scenes measures? This is a great question, Ivars. So performance is awesome because these visual calculations get executed on the aggregated data. They never reach back into the model. They never reach back into your direct query source once, because we retrieve the information from, let's say, the direct query source once to paint the visual onto your screen anyway. And then your visual calculations are just executed on the numbers we already retrieved. So the performance is about 300 to 500% better than any measure. So even if you didn't want to benefit from anything the Visual Calc offers, you can actually benefit from it by just taking your measure expression and putting it into a Visual Calc and then having better performance. Because, for example, if I wanted to calculate profit just for those couple years, I don't only have to subtract a couple numbers, right? I don't need to go and sum up all the individual, look at all the individual sales records and take the sales amount and total product cost for each record, for each of them calculate a profit, and then aggregate those. I don't have to do that. I can just do the profit on the higher level. So even if my scenario was to just do profit on those high level, I can just take the same DAX expression, put it into my measure, in my visual calc, and I will benefit from performance benefits right there. So our expectation is actually in the long run, people might gravitate towards visual calcs as the default way of writing calculations instead of measures, just because of performance and the ease of expression, because it's way easier to write and maintain and understand.
I would say certainly for time intelligence. To be honest, I think this seems to be a huge win for time intelligence.
Yes.
And you say, especially and you have, as much as we don't like them, those reports that are very management level reports where sometimes it's just a big table full of what's going on. And for time intelligence, the performance could be huge.
Yes, because the time intel stuff will only have to work.
Yeah.
Like time intel, if I do a total year to date today, we'll always go back to the lowest level, right?
Yeah.
But you don't need to go back to the lowest level. Once I have the quarter numbers, the only thing I need maximum to do is sum up 4 numbers. Well, Power BI can probably do that. I guess.
We'll see. I'm sure. Yeah.
I mean,
wow.
So yeah, that's all. And then, let's see what I can say.
And then this might end up in lots of hidden columns, I think, in this matrix, like in Excel files with
yes,
300 columns with calculations. And of course, it's not so maintainable as measures in the model, but I think this is the self-service part. And the global measures, they still have to be calculated in the model to share the data set.
Exactly. So you're right there. That's exactly what we're thinking, is that we would expect people to slowly build their way into actually measures, right? So again, the donut thing, right? You get used to DAX, and at some point you want to graduate towards measures. We're not taking measures away. They're still here. We're just postponing the time that you have to worry about them. Right now, it's you want to do anything, you have to worry about measures and calculate and filter context, right? That's the problem. We're just giving you more tools that postpone your exposure to that, right? You don't have to be exposed to that complexity from day 0. You can just go to day, whatever, 300, and then think, I need to do something more advanced. There's a concept called measures. Let me dive into that. Let me get one of those books and understand all there is about measures and filter context. Now I understand the full picture, right? We're just hiding that away from you a little bit at the beginning. So if you think about the learning curve of DAX today, it's like a hockey stick. It goes almost vertical, right? What we're doing here is making it more gradual.
One of the features that you mentioned, I kind of, when you said it, I'm not sure if it's foreseen that way, but I thought it would be actually quite perhaps more useful for the user rather than the report builder. You mentioned the functionality that would mimic something that you get in Excel when you click on a value, and it would show how that calculation or how that number came to be, would show the calculation behind the number. If somehow that was possible for the report reader rather than the report builder, that would be huge, I think, if that was possible.
That is something we call the explain mode. And we've been thinking about actually adding that into personalize as well.
Okay. That could be cool.
So in personalize, I would be able then to change visual calcs and then also see, how this number came to be.
Nice. Wow. Lots of really interesting stuff. I think it's going to be very popular. I think you're going to get a lot of feedback, mate. I got to say.
I hope so. I'm counting on it because, as I said, we made loads of choices along this journey, and we decided loads of things to just keep moving forward. We're in brand new territory, and I need you all to start playing with it eventually and tell us, hey, this is the wrong choice for my scenario, and then we can talk about what would be the right choice, right? And that's exactly where I think we need to come together and build the right feature. So I'm confident we made a lot of good choices. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying all of our choices were bad, but there's definitely a couple, like the sort and the hiding the window function from you. and the reusability story, that I'm less confident in our choices. But I'm also don't have like the ammunition right now to change that. I need you all to change, to say, hey, this doesn't work because of reasons.
Yeah, it doesn't makes much sense, to be honest, to have the window functions ready. I just think of some like exotic scenarios when I need to deploy one calculation to 100 reports in an enterprise context, and just not by sharing the visual, but by knowing exactly the underlying factors and sharing it. But obviously it only works in the visual, so it's kind of a broken part of the data model. And so it won't be the standard context. But,
right, exactly.
Definitely I see a big potential for the if and everything what comes with if, because it's like Excel. The adoption will explode with this feature, and then you will have lots of big matrices, and everyone uses Excel and if in Excel. So the desire will come here too.
I hope so. That's the goal. And we're just trying to make DAX easier and trying to like empower more people, definitely people coming from Excel backgrounds to, onboard onto this whole journey easier. Not removing any complexity. We're just hiding complexity for them from them for a little bit, putting them inside this little box, this little sandbox. And, this is only the thing you have to worry about. Yes, there's a whole wild world out there, but you don't have to worry about it right now if you don't want to, right? And that's essentially what we're doing here.
Cool. Awesome.
So any other questions, concerns, feedback?
I'm still writing the post with the mind blown, because I was so concentrating on watching.
Yeah.
So I'm not finished yet.
It's one of those ones. I feel like I'm going to be thinking about this. I've had the questions, and I'm going to have, the more I think about it, the more questions are going to come. It's like I'm very much looking forward to trying it out. So next year when it comes to preview, straight there.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I'm excited for you to try it out. And if you have, if you're like Ben and you're like, I need to chew on this for a little bit, and before I have questions, feel free to, reach out at any point. I can show you my contact details again. And I would love to talk about, your questions, your concerns, anything, right? So if there's anything you wanna give feedback on this right now or wait until March, feel free. I would love to learn. And also, I'll just tell you if that is not in scope, right? I won't try to, promise something that we won't be building, right? I'd much rather be realistic on what choices we make, right? For example, when somebody asks, hey, can I also add rows? No, you can't, right? You will be able to decide what will be on the subtotals and totals, but you will not be able to interject rows like you can in Excel, for example. That is not the concept that we're building, right? So I'd much rather be honest and clear about the expectations you should have. But yeah, so feel free to reach out now or after you've thought about it, or maybe, I don't know, after some well-deserved rest at the end of the year, if you have time for that. Reach out and let me know what you think.
Awesome.
Cool.
So, Jay, thank you so much. It's been a
lot.
really interesting session. Yeah. I'm sure everyone in the chat agrees. This video is going to be posted to our YouTube channel, so people can watch it back there. Definitely will be doing that myself, just for waiting. Maybe I'll watch it a few times until March arrives. You know what I mean? Just sit there, watch it. I want that. Yeah. And if you're watching this video on our YouTube channel, please like and subscribe and all those things.
Yeah. 2 persons left for the sound.
Smash the subscribe button. I think it is.
Smash the subscribe button. Thank you for keeping me young, mate. I appreciate it. I'm so old, seeing words like click. Anyway. Cool. Thanks for joining, everyone. Great questions. Nice attendance. And again, Jay, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really informative.
Thanks a lot. Looking
thanks
forward
a lot
for March.
Thanks a lot.
Everyone.
See you all.
Take care.
Much appreciated. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.